Most of us know the story of Joseph, right? The colorful coat, the pit, the dramatic, meteoric rise to power in Egypt. But today, we're diving into this explainer to unpack the profound theological weight and really the grand literary climax of Genesis chapter 50. We're going to answer one massive question. What is the actual underlying reason Joseph radically forgave the very brothers who sold him into slavery? It's a fascinating look at the exact intersection of human betrayal and divine sovereignty. Let's get right into it. Now, to truly grasp the immense psychological stakes of this moment, we first have to wrap our heads around the absolute, untouchable authority Joseph held in Egypt. The narrative here is bringing the whole arc of the Abrahamic covenant full circle. You see, God had promised Abraham that his descendants would face hardship in a foreign land, but would ultimately leave with great possessions. And here we are, generations later. Jacob, the patriarch of the family, has just passed away. Joseph is sitting as second in command over all of Egypt. It's the ultimate setup. When absolute power meets ancient betrayal, well, what happens next?
Well, to see just how much power Joseph actually wielded, just look at how the Egyptians reacted to his father's death. The text literally tells us Egypt mourned Jacob for 70 days. 70 days! Just pause and think about that for a second. An entire global superpower basically shutting down for over 2 months to mourn a foreign shepherd. It's a staggering royal honor, usually reserved only for pharaohs or the absolute highest-ranking dignitaries. I mean, Joseph even commands his personal physicians, not the standard Egyptian cultic priests, to embalm Jacob. The fact that the entire nation of Egypt paused to mourn a Hebrew patriarch, it just proves how much immense power and respect Joseph had. He practically had the world at his fingertips.
And this immense respect continues right into the burial rites. You've got the 40 days of embalming, and then that 70 days of national mourning. But despite having all this Egyptian royal status, Joseph does something totally unexpected. He doesn't just bury Jacob in some grand Egyptian pyramid or mausoleum. Instead, he speaks to Pharaoh's household and organizes this massive cortege. We're talking chariots, horsemen, Pharaoh's top officials, to travel all the way back to Canaan. They bury Jacob in the Cave of Machpelah. And this is key, because this is the exact field Abraham purchased as a family burial site. By doing this, Joseph is honoring the sworn obligation to his father, firmly affirming their true covenant identity and inheritance over all the Egyptian honors in the world. So the funeral is over, they make the trek back to Egypt, and man, the tension in the room among Joseph's brothers must have been palpable. With Jacob's protection gone, all that ancient guilt comes rushing back. Now remember, years earlier, Joseph had already told them he forgave them. But psychological realism really kicks in here. The brothers are utterly terrified. In their heads, they're probably thinking, was Joseph just playing the good son while dad was alive? Now that Jacob is gone, is Joseph going to use his supreme, untouchable power to finally crush them for tossing him in a pit and selling him into slavery all those years ago? Honestly, they're so terrified that they actually fabricate a dying wish from their father just to save their own skin. It's the ultimate panic move. They send a message to Joseph claiming that Jacob left a strict command saying, "Please forgive the transgression of your brothers." And then they just completely break down. They fall before Joseph and literally offer themselves up as his slaves. It's wild when you think about it. The very thing they tried to avoid decades ago by selling him, they are now willingly submitting to out of sheer, absolute panic. But when Joseph hears this desperate plea and sees his older brothers terrified on the floor before him, he weeps. He isn't angry, he's just heartbroken that they still don't get it. And he responds with this incredibly piercing question. He says, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God?" Joseph utterly refuses to usurp divine prerogative. He won't execute personal vengeance because he knows right down to his core that ultimate judgment belongs to Yahweh alone. So here's the thing. Joseph didn't just forgive his brothers because, time heals all wounds, or because he was just a nice guy with a soft heart. No, he forgave them because of a massive theological worldview that guided his entire life. It's a concept called Compatibilist Providence. Now, that's a big, fancy term, but it simply means the coexistence of full human moral responsibility right alongside absolute divine sovereignty. Basically, the brothers are fully 100% responsible for their wicked choices, but God remains completely sovereign over the outcome, without God ever being the author of the sin itself. And this brilliantly illustrates that exact concept in what is probably the most famous verse in the whole book, Genesis 50:20. Just look at the dual agency at play here. Joseph looks right at his brothers and says, "As for you, you meant evil against me." That's the human intent, right? Full moral responsibility. But God meant it for good. That is divine sovereignty.
God essentially subverted their human malfeasance for a highly specific redemptive purpose, to physically preserve the covenant family through a massive global famine. God's promised plan absolutely could not be derailed by their betrayal.
But Joseph's actual application of this theology is what makes it so radically different. His reconciliation is not just some passive sentiment. He doesn't just say, "Hey, I forgive you," and then banish them to the outskirts of Egypt to fend for themselves. He tells them, "I will provide for you and your little ones." It's an active, ongoing posture of grace. Because he trusts that God is writing a much larger story, Joseph is completely freed up to actively love and protect the very people who literally tried to destroy him. Then we fast forward to the end of Joseph's own life. The text makes a point to note that Joseph lives to be 110 years old. Now, interestingly enough, in ancient Egyptian literature, 110 was considered the absolute ideal perfect lifespan. He effectively lived the ancient Egyptian dream. He lives long enough to see and bless the third generation of his family, placing his great-grandchildren on his knees, which was a cultural sign of adoption and blessing within the covenant family. But despite having literally every worldly success you could imagine, his final focus is entirely on the future of God's promises, not his own past achievements. So, on his deathbed, Joseph gathers his brothers and gives this powerful prophetic testimony. He tells them, "I am about to die, but God will surely visit you." In the original Hebrew, he actually uses this incredible double verb construction, pakord yipkod, which literally translates to visiting, he will visit. This kind of linguistic repetition emphasizes the absolute, unbreakable certainty of divine intervention. Joseph knows the exile is coming, for sure, but he also knows the exodus is coming. So he makes them swear an oath, "You shall carry up my bones from here." Genesis then concludes with a truly striking visual image. Joseph dies at 110, he's embalmed, and he's placed in a coffin in Egypt. But he is left unburied. Think about that for a second. For the centuries of brutal Egyptian bondage that follow, that coffin just sits there, above ground. It serves as this unburied, visible witness to the Israelites. Every single time they looked at it, it reminded them that human rebellion, slavery, and even death cannot void God's promised plan. It continually pointed them forward to their future redemption and the land they were promised. Zooming out a bit, this exact paradigm of human evil being subverted by divine providence actually becomes the undeniable theological DNA for the entire New Testament. You see it in Hebrews, where Joseph's oath about his bones is highlighted as his supreme act of faith. You see it in Acts, where Stephen uses the Patriarch's burial to trace God's progressive preparation for the Messiah. Paul draws directly on this exact same logic in Romans 8:28, cementing that God works all things for good. And perhaps most profoundly in the book of Acts, the early apostles apply this dual agency directly to the crucifixion. Just like Joseph's brothers, wicked men acted with sinful intent to crucify Jesus, yet they accomplished exactly what God's definite plan had preordained for the salvation of the world. Joseph typologically points right to the true seed, Jesus Christ. Seeing how perfectly God's redemptive plan was preserved through Joseph's suffering, his betrayal, and his ultimate exaltation, it really changes how we view absolutely everything. It leaves us to wonder, if God can take the darkest, most painful human malfeasance and subvert it into a masterpiece of redemption that literally saves nations, how might the hardest parts of our own stories fit into a much larger, beautiful plan? Thank you so much for walking through this incredible text with me today. Keep looking for that larger story, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.